My husband trashed my keepsakes until I revealed his secret evidence. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My husband smiled at our anniversary guests, completely unaware that the flash drive in my pocket was about to send him to federal prison. My name is Chloe. I am 30 years old, and as I stood in the center of our hypermodern, meticulously sterile living room, I felt like an absolute stranger in my own life. The air was incredibly thick with expensive designer perfumes, the clinking of crystal champagne flutes, and the low, arrogant hum of wealthy people discussing their investment portfolios. I had recently lost my mother, the absolute anchor of my world, to a brutal, lightning-fast battle with pancreatic cancer. My heart was still a raw, gaping, agonizing wound. But Julian, my husband of exactly 5 years, fiercely insisted we throw this massive, lavish party to celebrate our perfect marriage. He stood across the room right now, holding court, wearing a flawless bespoke suit and looking every single inch the successful, untouchable executive he desperately pretended to be. I managed to force a stiff, practiced smile back at him, all while feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of the small silver flash drive nestled deeply inside the silk pocket of my evening gown. That tiny piece of metal contained the absolute, catastrophic destruction of the pristine life he had so meticulously built entirely on a foundation of my stolen inheritance and his profound, sickening deceit. Julian has always been dangerously obsessed with aesthetics. He aggressively loves clean lines, perfectly empty surfaces, and projecting an image of absolute, unbothered success to his colleagues. But behind that flawless, charming facade hides a man so breathtakingly cruel and deeply manipulative that it literally took the malicious destruction of my most treasured, irreplaceable possessions for me to finally open my eyes and see his true face. I took a slow, trembling breath, my eyes slowly tracking over to the tall metal microphone stand deliberately set up right near the sweeping glass staircase. The small, heavy flash drive pressed firmly against my hip, serving as a constant, physical reminder of the devastating financial and emotional crimes I was about to expose to every single person he desperately wanted to impress. I watched his boss laugh at one of his jokes, completely blind to the monster standing right in front of him. I adjusted my dress, waiting for the perfect, calculated moment to strike. I stepped toward the microphone, ready to burn his entire fake world down. Our marriage had always been an intricate, exhausting performance directed entirely by Julian. We met when I was 24, deeply impressed by his intense drive and sharp, sophisticated charm. But shortly after the wedding, his underlying need for absolute control began to suffocate every aspect of my daily existence. He demanded a hypermodern, minimalist aesthetic for our home, a massive, cold house made entirely of stark white walls, polished concrete floors, and aggressive glass fixtures. I wasn't allowed to buy colorful throw pillows, leave a book on the coffee table, or display anything that disrupted his vision of a magazine-worthy lifestyle. He treated me less like a beloved wife and much more like a carefully curated prop in his grand, narcissistic theater. When my mother passed away 6 months ago, she left me a substantial trust fund and a large, intricately carved wooden memory box filled with her most precious keepsakes. It held faded Polaroids of my parents, her favorite silver locket, handwritten letters from my late grandmother, and the delicate lace veil she wore on her own wedding day. To me, that box was an absolute lifeline to the woman who loved me unconditionally. To Julian, it was merely an offensive, disgusting pile of clutter ruining the aesthetic flow of his pristine master bedroom. "Chloe, you really need to let go of this hoarding mentality," he would constantly sneer, side-eyeing the beautiful wooden box resting on my dresser. "It's emotionally stunted to cling to old trash. You're dragging down the energy of the entire house." I would constantly beg him to understand, trying to explain that those fragile items were the only tangible pieces of my mother I had left in this entire world. He would just roll his eyes, let out a deep, dramatic sigh of pure exhaustion, and tell me I needed expensive therapy to fix my unhealthy, pathetic attachments. I spent months actively shrinking myself, desperately trying to keep the peace while quietly mourning my mother in the darkest, loneliest corners of our cold house. I never realized his cruel criticisms were actually a calculated distraction from his own massive sins. The true nightmare began the very moment I returned from a weekend retreat. I unlocked the front door and immediately noticed the chilling silence. I had reluctantly agreed to go on a mandatory 3-day yoga and wellness retreat, mostly because Julian relentlessly pressured me to detox my grief and stop being such a depressing burden around the house. The entire time I was gone, I felt an incredibly strange, gnawing anxiety deep in my stomach, a primal instinct practically screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. When I finally walked through our heavy mahogany front door on Sunday evening, the house felt entirely different. It wasn't just quiet, it felt maliciously sterilized. I dropped my overnight bag in the grand foyer and walked directly up the floating glass staircase toward our master bedroom, desperate for a long, hot shower. The moment I stepped into the room, my heart violently stopped beating. The beautifully carved wooden memory box, which had sat safely on the corner of my large vanity for the past 6 months, was completely gone. I froze, my eyes frantically scanning the perfectly empty, gleaming white surfaces of the bedroom. I immediately rushed to the closet, tearing through my meticulously organized shelves, thinking perhaps the cleaning service had accidentally moved it. Nothing. Panic began to aggressively claw at my throat. I ran downstairs and found Julian casually sitting on the expensive leather sofa, sipping a glass of bourbon and scrolling through his tablet with zero care in the world. "Julian, where's my mother's box?" I asked, my voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of absolute dread and rising panic. He didn't even bother to look up from his glowing screen. "I got rid of it," he stated flatly, as if he were talking about tossing out expired milk. "I told you it was ruining the aesthetic of the room. You were away, so I took the initiative to finally declutter that massive pile of depressing junk. It's for your own good, Chloe. You need to move on." My entire world tilted violently on its axis as the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of his words slammed into my chest like a physical blow. He had maliciously thrown away my dead mother's irreplaceable treasures just to maintain his sterile, psychopathic aesthetic. I couldn't even formulate a coherent sentence through the absolute shock. I turned around and sprinted out the front door into the rain. A massive, violent thunderstorm had just broken over our affluent suburban neighborhood, sending sheets of freezing rain violently crashing against the pavement. I didn't care. I didn't grab a coat, an umbrella, or even my shoes. I sprinted barefoot down our long, winding driveway toward the massive community dumpsters located near the back edge of our gated property. The icy rain instantly soaked through my thin yoga clothes, plastering my hair to my face and blinding my vision. But the sheer adrenaline and absolute panic completely numbed any physical discomfort. "Please, God, let the garbage trucks be delayed," I repeatedly whispered to myself, my voice completely lost in the roaring thunder. When I reached the giant green metal bins, I began frantically pulling out heavy, dripping black trash bags, ripping them violently open with my bare hands. I dug through rotting food waste, discarded packaging, and wet coffee grounds, desperately searching for the familiar shape of the carved wooden box or the delicate lace of my grandmother's veil. The smell was absolutely putrid, a nauseating mix of decay and wet cardboard, but I kept violently tearing through the bags, sobbing hysterically as the freezing rain washed the grime down my arms. After 30 agonizing minutes of digging through the primary dumpster, my hands were bleeding from sharp plastic edges, and I had found absolutely nothing. A horrifying, paralyzing thought struck me. What if he had taken the box somewhere else to destroy it? I left the dumpsters and sprinted back up the driveway, throwing open the side door to our massive, 3-car garage. The garage was Julian's pristine sanctuary, filled with his expensive sports car and perfectly organized tools. I started wildly tearing through the large plastic recycling bins lined up neatly against the back wall, desperately hoping he had been too lazy to walk all the way down to the main dumpsters. I threw empty cardboard boxes and shattered glass bottles across the immaculate concrete floor, completely destroying his perfect organization. I was a desperate, grieving woman entirely pushed to the absolute brink of insanity by her husband's cruelty. My bloody hand suddenly hit something heavy hidden behind his golf bag. I aggressively yanked Julian's expensive leather golf bag out of the way, the heavy titanium clubs clattering loudly against the cold concrete floor. Hidden deep in the darkest, tightest corner of the pristine garage, shoved deliberately behind a stack of unused winter tires, was a thick, heavy-duty black contractor garbage bag. My heart leapt violently into my throat. The shape was completely wrong for my mother's delicate wooden box, but in my frantic, desperate state, I convinced myself he must have forcefully crushed it to make it fit. I grabbed the thick plastic and ripped it open with my torn, bleeding fingers. Instead of splintered wood and torn lace, I found myself staring at a massive, incredibly heavy, dark gray fireproof lockbox. It was a high-end, digital combination safe, the kind you buy to protect valuable corporate assets or massive amounts of cash. It was completely covered in a thick layer of dust, except for the digital keypad, which was suspiciously clean, indicating it had been opened very recently. I sat back on my soaked heels, the freezing rainwater dripping from my hair onto the cold concrete floor, completely confused. Julian had a massive, built-in wall safe in his home office where he kept our passports and important legal documents. Why on earth would he have a secret, hidden lockbox shoved in a garbage bag behind his golf clubs in the garage? The sheer, calculated secrecy of its placement sent a terrifying, icy chill straight down my spine that had absolutely nothing to do with the freezing rain. This wasn't trash. This was something he was desperately, meticulously trying to hide from me. Something he had accidentally bumped into the recycling pile while maliciously throwing out my mother's irreplaceable keepsakes. I stared at the blinking red light on the digital keypad, my mind racing through 100 different, horrifying scenarios. The profound, agonizing grief over my lost mother suddenly took a sharp, aggressive backseat to an entirely new, terrifying emotion, intense, undeniable suspicion. Whatever was inside this heavy metal box was completely off-limits to me. I grabbed a heavy steel hammer from his perfectly organized, pristine tool bench. I brought the heavy steel hammer down on the digital keypad with every single ounce of terrifying, unadulterated rage I possessed in my shivering body. The first strike violently shattered the plastic casing, sending sharp pieces of black debris flying across the garage. I hit it again and again, screaming in pure frustration, taking out all the agonizing pain of losing my mother's memories on the thick metal lock. On the seventh brutal strike, the internal locking mechanism finally completely gave way with a loud, satisfying crack. I dropped the heavy hammer, my chest heaving with exhaustion, and pried the thick, fireproof lid open. The safe was entirely packed with dark secrets. Sitting right on top was a cheap, prepaid burner smartphone, completely dead and completely out of place in Julian's world of luxury technology. Beneath the phone was a small stack of identification cards. I picked one up, and my stomach violently dropped to the floor. It was a driver's license featuring Julian's exact photograph, but the name printed next to his face clearly read Marcus Vance, and the address listed was in a city 3 hours away. My hands shook uncontrollably as I dug deeper into the dark box, pulling out a thick, heavy stack of financial documents. They were official bank statements from an offshore institution I had never even heard of. I desperately scanned the printed pages, my eyes struggling to comprehend the massive numbers staring back at me. There were regular, enormous wire transfers occurring every single month, draining hundreds of thousands of dollars from what appeared to be my own personal, inherited trust fund accounts. The sheer magnitude of the financial deception was absolutely staggering. He wasn't just hiding a small, secret savings account. He was systematically, deliberately moving massive amounts of wealth through a completely fabricated identity. The man I had slept next to for 5 entire years was a complete, terrifying stranger, a ghost operating violently in the shadows of my own home. I frantically grabbed the cheap burner phone, desperately praying it would turn on. I needed to know exactly who he was talking to. I immediately scrambled to find a matching charging cable in the messy pile of Julian's tools, eventually plugging the cheap burner phone into a wall outlet near the garage door. While waiting for the dark screen to finally flicker to life, I violently dialed my best friend Maya on my own cell phone. Maya is a fiercely protective, incredibly sharp woman who had never fully trusted Julian's overly polished, charming exterior. "Maya, get to my house right now. Come through the back gate. Don't let Julian see you," I whispered frantically, my voice cracking with pure terror. She didn't ask a single question. She just hung up and started driving. 10 minutes later, Maya slipped quietly into the freezing garage, taking one look at my bleeding hands and the smashed lockbox before pulling me into a tight, grounding hug. The burner phone finally chimed, completely bypassing any password protection. I opened the messaging app, and the horrifying truth violently exploded across the glowing screen. There were literally thousands of explicit, deeply intimate text messages exchanged with a contact saved simply as Vanessa. I recognized the name immediately. She was a 28-year-old junior executive at Julian's tech firm, a woman who had boldly attended our holiday parties and smiled directly in my face. The messages were absolutely sickening. "I can't wait until the old baggage is completely gone," Julian had texted her just 3 days ago, clearly referring to me. "The new house is almost ready for our real family." Maya gasped loudly, snatching the phone from my trembling hands and opening the photo gallery. It was filled with ultrasound pictures and graphic photos of Julian and Vanessa in a massive, empty luxury home. But the absolute worst discovery was an email attachment saved directly on the phone's local storage, an official real estate closing document for a stunning $2 million property. The buyer listed on the official deed wasn't Marcus Vance or Julian. It was Vanessa, entirely funded by a massive cash wire transfer. The origin of that massive wire transfer made my blood freeze. Maya and I frantically spread the thick stack of stolen bank statements and legal documents across the cold, damp concrete floor of the garage, aggressively piecing together the horrifying timeline of his massive fraud. Julian hadn't just drained the liquid cash from the substantial trust fund my late mother had left me. That would have been entirely devastating on its own, but his calculated greed went much deeper than simple theft. I picked up a dense, multi-page legal contract from the bottom of the smashed lockbox, and the sheer, unadulterated evil of his plan completely knocked the wind right out of my lungs. It was an official, finalized loan agreement for a massive second mortgage. He had completely leveraged the deed to my childhood home, the beautiful, sprawling estate my grandparents had built and my mother had so proudly left to me, to secure a massive, high-risk, $2 million cash loan. I stared at the signature line at the very bottom of the thick contract. There, written in bold blue ink, was my exact, distinctive signature. The loops and angles were completely flawless. He had meticulously, perfectly forged my signature to steal my family's legacy. He took out an illegal mortgage on my childhood home, entirely draining its equity, to buy a massive luxury mansion in the suburbs for his pregnant, 28-year-old mistress. If he defaulted on those massive secret loan payments, the bank would immediately seize my family home, leaving me with absolutely nothing. He was systematically, brutally stripping away every single piece of my history, my financial security, and my entire future, all while aggressively gaslighting me about my emotional attachment to a simple wooden box. The profound, sickening realization that I was married to a calculating, predatory monster made me violently nauseous. Maya gripped my shoulders tightly, her own eyes blazing with an intense, terrifying fury I had never seen before. "He is going to pay for this," she whispered darkly. The garage door connecting to the kitchen suddenly clicked loudly and swung open. Maya instantly kicked the heavy, smashed fireproof safe deeply back into the dark shadows behind the stack of unused winter tires, quickly throwing the torn black garbage bags completely over the scattered, terrifying evidence. I desperately wiped the freezing rainwater and tears from my pale face, just as Julian confidently stepped out onto the top stair of the garage landing. He was wearing perfectly pressed, expensive designer loungewear, looking incredibly annoyed that his peaceful evening was being slightly disrupted. "Chloe, what on earth are you doing out here in the freezing cold?" he demanded, his voice dripping with pure, arrogant condescension. "Are you seriously still crying over that absolute trash I threw away? It's completely pathetic. You need to grow up." Every single primal instinct in my entire body violently screamed at me to grab the heavy steel hammer off the cold floor and smash his perfect, smug face into a million pieces. The absolute, blinding rage burning within my chest was so intense I could physically taste copper in the back of my dry mouth. But I desperately remembered the forged signature on the mortgage documents. If I confronted him right now, Without airtight legal protection, he would instantly realize I had found his secret stash. He would immediately transfer the remaining stolen money, destroy the burner phone, and legally bury me in expensive litigation until I lost my childhood home entirely. I had to swallow the agonizing, suffocating bile rising in my throat. I forcefully dropped my shoulders, looked down at my bleeding hands, and forced my voice to sound completely broken and entirely submissive. "I know, Julian. I'm sorry," I whispered, forcing a pathetic, trembling sob. I really missed my mom. But you're right. It was just useless clutter. I'll come inside now." He rolled his eyes in profound disgust, muttering about my emotional instability under his breath before turning around and walking back into the warm house. The moment the door clicked shut, Maya immediately called a lawyer. The very next morning, while Julian was confidently leading a massive board meeting at his tech firm, Maya drove me directly to the incredibly intimidating, glass-walled downtown office of Mr. Sterling. He was a brilliant, highly feared attorney who specialized entirely in complex forensic accounting and high-net-worth divorce fraud. I sat in his pristine, silent conference room, completely terrified, and laid the smashed burner phone, the fake identification card, and the forged mortgage documents directly on his large, polished mahogany desk. Mr. Sterling barely even blinked. He adjusted his expensive glasses, meticulously reviewed the horrifying paperwork for 30 agonizing minutes, and then immediately deployed an entire team of aggressive financial investigators. Within 48 hours, his highly skilled experts had officially verified the terrifying extent of Julian's massive crimes. A professional handwriting analyst conclusively confirmed that the signature on the $2 million mortgage document was a highly sophisticated, calculated forgery entirely executed by Julian. Furthermore, Mr. Sterling's forensic accountants tracked the exact, hidden IP addresses Julian had used to illegally access my private trust fund accounts, proving he was actively preparing to completely drain the remaining balance by the end of the current month. "We have him completely dead to rights, Chloe," Mr. Sterling announced, his deep voice radiating absolute, terrifying confidence. "This is no longer just a messy, complicated divorce. This is massive, coordinated wire fraud, severe identity theft, and malicious bank forgery. Your husband is looking at serious, substantial federal prison time." Acting with brutal, calculated speed, Mr. Sterling immediately filed emergency, secret legal injunctions with a sympathetic federal judge. We completely froze every single one of Julian's secondary financial accounts, instantly trapping the stolen money before he could successfully transfer it offshore. The incredibly complex, airtight legal trap was finally set. Now, I just needed the absolute perfect stage to strike. For the next 2 agonizing weeks, I completely dissociated from reality, delivering the absolute performance of a lifetime inside our cold, sterile house. I played the role of the docile, deeply medicated, entirely grieving wife to absolute perfection. Julian, completely blinded by his own massive, narcissistic arrogance, didn't suspect a single thing. In his deeply twisted, psychotic mind, he had successfully broken my spirit by maliciously destroying my mother's precious keepsakes, completely neutralizing any potential threat I might have posed to his grand, secret life. He actually had the sheer, unbelievable audacity to constantly lecture me over dinner about how throwing away my cherished heirlooms was a necessary, painful step for my overall mental health and emotional maturity. He truly believed he was entirely untouchable. His monstrous ego required constant, massive validation, which is exactly why he aggressively insisted on moving forward with our incredibly lavish, ridiculously expensive 5th anniversary party. "We need to show the partners at the firm that our marriage is absolutely rock solid, Chloe," he commanded one evening, sipping his expensive scotch. "I'm up for a massive promotion, and optics are everything in this business. Wear the expensive red silk dress, smile constantly, and try not to look so completely depressed for once in your life." I simply nodded silently, staring blankly into my plate, secretly knowing that Mr. Sterling was coordinating directly with the local police department regarding the executed arrest warrants. Julian hired an incredibly expensive catering company, a live jazz quartet, and invited over 80 of his wealthiest, most influential colleagues and friends to fill our hypermodern home. He wanted a massive, captive audience to completely worship his fake, perfect existence. It was the most profound, disgusting display of absolute delusion I had ever witnessed. He walked around the massive house constantly dictating the exact, precise placement of the expensive floral arrangements, completely unaware of his impending doom. The fateful evening of the grand anniversary party finally aggressively arrived. Our massive, hypermodern living room was absolutely packed with 80 of Julian's wealthiest, most influential colleagues, all dressed in stunning, expensive evening wear and drinking perfectly chilled champagne. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy practically suffocated me the moment I gracefully walked down the sweeping glass staircase. Julian was completely in his element, loudly laughing with his senior partners, aggressively playing the role of the devoted, wildly successful husband. But the absolute, sickening pinnacle of his sheer arrogance was the terrifying fact that he had actually invited Vanessa to the party. The 28-year-old mistress was boldly standing near the massive marble kitchen island, wearing a tight black dress that barely concealed her growing pregnancy, sipping sparkling water and smiling directly at me whenever Julian wasn't looking. The utter, breathtaking disrespect made my blood boil with an intense, terrifying heat. At exactly 9 o'clock, Julian confidently tapped a silver spoon against his expensive crystal champagne flute, demanding absolute silence from the wealthy crowd. He smoothly stepped up to the metal microphone stand positioned perfectly in the center of the expansive room, flashing his signature million-dollar smile. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight," he began, his voice dripping with fake, sickening sincerity. "5 years ago, I married my absolute best friend, Chloe. Marriage is built on a foundation of absolute trust, unwavering honesty, and profound mutual respect. Chloe has been my absolute rock, and I am so incredibly blessed to share this beautiful, perfect life with her." The wealthy crowd immediately erupted into polite, warm applause. Vanessa openly smirked from across the room, completely secure in her stolen victory. Julian proudly gestured for me to join him at the center microphone. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold flash drive in my pocket. He expected me to play the role of the quiet, adoring prop. I stepped up to the microphone and smiled right back. The microphone instantly let out a sharp, high-pitched squeal of feedback that forcefully commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the massive room. I looked directly into Julian's arrogant eyes, completely dropping the pathetic, broken facade I had maintained for 2 agonizing weeks. "Julian is absolutely right," I announced clearly, my voice echoing loudly and firmly against the cold, stark white walls. "Honesty is truly everything," which is exactly why I prepared a very special, incredibly honest presentation for our lovely guests tonight. Before Julian could even register the terrifying shift in my tone, Maya swiftly stepped out from the dark shadows near the back wall and forcefully plugged the small silver flash drive directly into our massive, state-of-the-art smart projector system. The giant, blank white wall behind Julian instantly illuminated, aggressively blasting a massive, high-definition image of the completely forged $2 million mortgage document, highlighting my perfectly copied signature in bright, undeniable neon yellow. The wealthy crowd immediately gasped in sheer, collective horror. Maya ruthlessly clicked to the absolute next slide. Massive, undeniable screenshots of Julian's most explicit, sickening text messages to Vanessa flashed aggressively across the wall, accompanied by the graphic ultrasound photos and the official real estate closing documents for the secret luxury mansion he bought with my stolen family inheritance. "My husband," I declared loudly over the rising, chaotic murmurs of his completely shocked colleagues, "is a calculating, sociopathic fraud who maliciously forged my signature to completely drain my dead mother's trust fund, all to buy a massive secret house for his pregnant mistress, Vanessa, who is currently standing right over there by the kitchen island." Every single head in the massive, packed room violently whipped around to stare directly at the terrified 28-year-old woman. The CEO of Julian's company dropped his champagne glass, the crystal shattering loudly against the polished concrete floor. The pristine, perfect illusion was completely and totally utterly destroyed forever. Total, unadulterated chaos violently erupted inside the hypermodern living room. Julian's face drained of every single ounce of color, transforming from arrogant confidence into absolute, terrifying panic in a fraction of a second. He desperately lunged forward, violently ripping the expensive power cord of the smart projector directly out of the wall socket. But the catastrophic, irreversible damage was already entirely done. The CEO of his prestigious tech firm looked at Julian with an expression of pure, unmasked disgust and immediately walked straight out the heavy front door without saying a single word. Julian's entire lucrative career evaporated instantly in that very moment. Vanessa, suddenly realizing that the secret bank accounts were completely frozen and the stolen money was entirely gone, let out a piercing, hysterical sob, dropped her designer purse, and physically sprinted out the back patio doors into the dark night, completely abandoning him. Julian spun around wildly, his eyes wide and completely unhinged, looking for absolutely anyone to blame. "Chloe, you insane, hysterical bitch, what have you done?" He violently screamed, aggressively taking a threatening step directly toward me. Before he could even close the distance, the heavy oak front doors violently swung open, and Mr. Sterling calmly walked inside, flanked closely by 4 heavily armed, completely serious local police officers. The massive crowd of wealthy guests immediately parted like the Red Sea. Julian Vance, the lead officer, barked loudly, immediately pulling out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "You are officially under arrest for massive wire fraud, severe aggravated identity theft, and malicious criminal forgery." Julian violently fought against the officers, screaming pathetic, desperate lies as they roughly slammed him against his perfectly clean, minimalist white walls, completely shattering his immaculate aesthetic forever. I watched with absolute, stone-cold satisfaction as the man who threw away my mother's memories was forcefully dragged out of his own house in complete disgrace. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the empty driveway beautifully. It has been exactly 14 long, deeply exhausting months since that catastrophic anniversary party completely changed the entire trajectory of my life. Julian was officially convicted of multiple federal felonies and is currently serving an extremely lengthy sentence in a maximum security prison, entirely stripped of his wealth, his arrogant pride, and his precious public image. Through the relentless, aggressive legal brilliance of Mr. Sterling, I successfully managed to completely void the forged mortgage, entirely saving my beloved childhood home from being seized by the ruthless banks. Vanessa completely vanished into total obscurity, leaving Julian entirely alone to rot in his cold, concrete cell. I spent months actively undergoing intense trauma therapy, slowly learning how to properly heal from the profound, terrifying depths of his severe narcissistic abuse. I used to cry myself to sleep over the agonizing loss of my mother's beautifully carved wooden memory box and the fragile, irreplaceable heirlooms he maliciously destroyed in the rainy garbage dumpsters. But I eventually realized a profound, life-altering truth. He successfully destroyed the physical, tangible objects, but he inadvertently handed me the ultimate, empowering key to my absolute freedom. My mother didn't just leave me a box of old, fading Polaroids. She left me her fierce, uncompromising strength, the very strength that allowed me to completely dismantle a monster. If you ever find yourself trapped with a partner who constantly belittles your profound emotions, aggressively isolates you from your friends, or maliciously destroys the simple things you deeply love, please do not ignore those terrifying red flags. They are not simply trying to declutter your physical space. They are actively trying to completely erase your very identity. Walk away immediately, aggressively protect your assets, and absolutely never let anyone else write your story. I now live peacefully in my grandmother's beautiful, messy, entirely colorful house, surrounded completely by incredible love. The only thing I threw away was my toxic husband.